The old man stood at the edge of the pier, uniform pressed, medals gleaming under the morning sun, a silent symbol of a lifetime spent in service. His hands trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from memory. 60 years ago, he had stood on that very deck as a young sailor, watching friends fall beside him during war. Today he had been invited to return, to walk that deck one last time, to honor the fallen and remember. But as he approached the ship, a young Navy lieutenant stepped forward, arms crossed. "Sorry, sir. This event is for current and active personnel only." The veteran paused, confused. His invitation letter fluttered in the sea breeze. "I was told I could come aboard." But the lieutenant didn't budge. Moments passed. The veteran turned to leave. Heart heavy. What the lieutenant didn't know was that someone had seen the exchange. Someone with stars on his collar and decades of stories behind his eyes. And when the Admiral gave his order, it wasn't just about respect. It was about honoring a forgotten hero and a lesson every sailor on that ship would never forget. The morning was crisp, with a calm wind rolling in from the ocean. It was the kind of day that sailors quietly admire, peaceful, still, with the sea whispering stories of the past. Standing alone at the edge of the naval dock was Richard Hawley, an 84-year-old retired petty officer who had once served with quiet distinction during the Vietnam War. He wasn't the kind of man who demanded recognition. His coat bore no rank, his face carried no prideful arrogance. But in his heart, he carried the names of friends who never came home. The memories didn't fade, not with age, not with time. Some ghosts don't leave you. And Richard never wanted them to. Today was supposed to be different. He had received a formal invitation to a special naval commemoration ceremony. The Navy was honoring war-era vessels and the men who had once served aboard them. It was a rare opportunity for veterans like Richard to come aboard, pay tribute, and walk the decks that once echoed with commands, prayers, and the beat of combat boots. He wore his original dress blues, pressed clean and just slightly tighter around the shoulders than he remembered. His medals, a Bronze Star, a Navy Commendation Medal, and a row of service ribbons had been carefully polished by his granddaughter the night before. "You look like you never left," she said with a smile, snapping a photo. But Richard's smile was different. It held weight. He didn't wear the uniform to impress. He wore it for the ones who COULDN single quotes D-dot as he approached the ship. A restored destroyer now used for training and ceremonial purposes, he slowed. His eyes scanned the hull, touching each rusted rivet and repainted bulkhead like sacred ground. His mind drifted back to the roaring engines, the explosions off. The port side, the smell of salt, fuel, and sweat. This was the ship where he lost his best friend, Petty Officer Mike Granger, during a night ambush near the Gulf of Tonkin. He never got to say goodbye. Just as his foot touched the boarding ramp, a voice called out sharply, pulling him back to the present. "Excuse me, sir." A young officer, maybe late 20s, stepped forward. His posture was rigid, his eyes masked behind mirrored sunglasses. "You can't board. This area is restricted to active duty personnel only." Richard blinked. "I was invited, son. I served on this very ship. I have my papers." He pulled a worn envelope from his inside pocket and handed it over. The lieutenant barely glanced at it. "I'm sorry, sir. I have direct orders to only allow current Navy personnel on board. No exceptions." There was no hostility in the officer's voice, just the robotic authority of someone following protocol, missing the humanity behind the situation. Richard's fingers curled slightly around the edge of his invitation. "I came a long way," he said quietly. "My family's waiting at the visitor's tent. I only wanted to just for a few minutes walk her deck again." The lieutenant didn't look up. "I understand. But I can't allow that. Please return to the designated viewing area." It was a moment of humiliation, subtle but sharp. Richard didn't argue. That wasn't his way. With quiet dignity, he nodded once, pocketed his letter, and turned away. Behind his back, young sailors watched curiously. Some whispered. Some looked away, but one pair of eyes didn single quotes t-dot up on the bridge. Admiral Thomas Breckinridge had seen the entire exchange. A legend in Navy circles, the Admiral had nearly 4 decades of service, multiple deployments, and a long memory. He didn't know Richard personally, but he recognized the posture, the age, the heartbreak. He recognized a man carrying invisible weight. Breckinridge narrowed his eyes and lowered his coffee. "Get me that man's name," he ordered, "and aid, and find out why the hell he's walking away. Because sometimes respect isn't about rank. It's about recognizing a soldier's sacrifice even decades later, and that's when everything began to change." Admiral Thomas Breckinridge wasn't known for sentimentality. He had commanded warships through treacherous waters, overseen rescue operations, and made impossible decisions that haunted him in the quiet hours of the night. But what set him apart, what had earned him the respect of thousands, was that he never forgot where he came from. He'd started as a deckhand, scrubbing floors, saluting lieutenants who didn't know his name, watching old veterans climb aboard during commemorations and thinking, will anyone remember me when I'm that age? So, when he saw the hunched figure of Richard Hawley walking slowly away from the boarding ramp, pride quietly shattered. Invitation crumpled in his hand. Something stirred inside him. "Commander Lewis," Breckinridge barked to his operations officer, "get me the roster of today's invitees. Cross-check any veterans who served on the USS Keller between 1965 and 1970, and get me the name of that officer who turned him away." The Admiral wasn't looking for someone to punish. He was looking for a story. Because sometimes a single ignored veteran represents thousands more who are forgotten. Within minutes, the data came in. Petty Officer First Class Richard Hawley, service number confirmed, assigned to USS Keller. 2 combat deployments during Vietnam, honorable discharge. Commendations for valor under fire. Breckinridge's jaw tightened. I knew I recognized that name. He pulled out his old mission logs, dog-eared papers from decades past. His own time aboard the USS Keller had come just a year after Hale's final deployment. The ship had been legendary during the war, fast, resilient, and constantly under fire. There it was. Operation Sea Lance, 1969. Petty Officer Hawley manned aft guns during sustained attack while medical evacuation was underway. Refused to abandon post despite fire in engine bay. Resulted in safe extraction of 11 wounded men. The Admiral leaned back in his chair. This man saved lives, held his ground in hellfire. And today we turned him away? He stood, eyes fierce. Have a car meet him at the visitor's tent. I want him escorted, no, welcomed back aboard. But the story didn't end there. The aide returned moments later with more news. Sir, the lieutenant who stopped him, Lieutenant Mason, didn't read the full guest protocol. It explicitly states that all registered veterans are to be honored guests. Breckinridge sighed. It's not just a procedural error. It's a failure of respect. We can't afford that. Not in this uniform. Meanwhile, at the visitors' area, Richard Hawley sat quietly on a bench, sipping a cup of lukewarm coffee. He didn't speak to anyone. His granddaughter, Emily, sat beside him, her eyes filled with concern. You okay, Grandpa? He nodded, forcing a smile. I've been through worse. I guess I thought they'd remember. That sentence cut deeper than any reprimand ever could. Moments later, 2 black Navy vehicles pulled up. Officers in full dress blues stepped out. Emily looked up, Puzzled, a tall, white-haired figure approached, Admiral Breckenridge himself. Sailors around the area stood at attention instinctively. Even the young lieutenant who had turned Richard. Away appeared, this time with a pale face and uncertain steps, Petty Officer Hawley. The Admiral said warmly. Richard stood slowly. "Yes, sir. I'm Admiral Thomas Breckenridge. I served aboard the Keller a year after you left. Your reputation never left that deck." Richard's brows lifted, stunned. The Admiral continued, voice firm and full of emotion. "We made a mistake today, one that I take full responsibility for. You didn't come to tour a ship. You came to remember your brothers. And by God, you're going to walk that deck like the hero you are." A hush fell over the area. Then, quietly, Admiral Breckenridge did something few expected. He saluted. A full, crisp salute, given not out of duty, but out of honor. Richard's throat tightened as he returned the salute. This wasn't just a gesture. It was a moment of long-delayed validation, one that every veteran longs for but few ever receive. The Admiral motioned for him to follow. As Richard walked toward the ship, this time with honor guards at his side, sailors along the rails stood in silent respect. Even the young lieutenant who had turned him away stood tall and saluted as he passed. Eyes filled with newfound understanding. At the base of the ramp, Admiral Breckenridge leaned in and whispered, "We don't forget real war heroes, Richard." "Not on my watch." And with that, the veteran stepped aboard the ship where echoes of bravery still lived, and where, finally, he was seen. The deck creaked beneath Richard's boots as he stepped aboard the USS Keller, a ship he hadn't walked on in over 5 decades. But somehow, it still felt like home. The sounds were different now. No alarms, no shouted commands. Just the distant cry of seagulls and the hushed breath of reverence from the sailors standing in 2 neat rows along the passageway. As he passed them, their eyes didn't just watch, they listened. Because Richard Hawley didn't wear power. He wore history. And everyone on that ship knew they were in the presence of one of those unsung heroes you rarely hear about, but whose courage built the very foundation of military tradition. His granddaughter Emily followed a few paces behind, camera in hand but hesitant to lift it. Even she could feel that this wasn't just about photos anymore. It was about memory. Admiral Breckenridge guided him gently toward the stern, past compartments long refurbished, past new recruits who had only read about the war in books. One sailor, no older than 20, leaned to another and whispered, "That's the guy from the '69 incident, the gunner who wouldn't leave the post." And that moment alone, being remembered, was more than any medal could offer. Richard paused beside one of the mounted guns. Time had dulled the steel, but not his memory. "This is where I was," he said quietly, placing his wrinkled hand on the cold barrel. "We were under fire from the shoreline. They hit the engine room. Fire below decks, smoke everywhere. Mike," his voice caught. Mike was helping carry out the wounded. He swallowed. "I told him to stay low, but he didn't listen." There was silence, the kind that wraps itself around a story like a flag around a casket. A group of young sailors had followed behind now, respectfully distanced but listening intently. Richard continued, voice low, eyes misted. "The last thing he said to me was, 'Don't let him forget us, Hawley.' I didn't know what to do. With that, I was 22. I didn't even know how to grieve." He turned and looked toward the open sea. "I came back home. Got married, raised kids, but I never came back to this ship. I thought maybe if I stayed away, I could forget the sounds. The blood, the smell of burning metal." A young female officer stepped forward, eyes filled with emotion. "You didn't forget. You carried it all this time. That's battlefield courage, sir. And that's what keeps the rest of us grounded." Richard smiled faintly. "Courage isn't what you feel in the moment. It's what you live with afterward." His words hung in the air like scripture. "Admiral." Breckinridge cleared his throat. "Petty Officer Hawley," he said formally, "we've prepared a short ceremony if you're willing. We'd like to recognize your service and your sacrifice." Richard shook his head softly. "It wasn't just mine. It was ours. Me, Mike, Torres, Newen, all of them. If you're going to honor anyone today, you honor them." The Admiral nodded, moved. With that, the sailors created a circle around the gun mount. One by one, they placed small name cards, names of men Richard had served with, names lost to history but resurrected in memory. Then, in a gesture of quiet but powerful symbolism, Admiral Breckinridge handed Richard a single Navy coin engraved, with the USS Keller insignia and the words, "Never Forgotten." "This isn't for valor, Richard," the Admiral said. "This is for keeping your promise." The old veteran looked at the coin, his lips pressed tight to hold back emotion. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't come for honor or spotlight, but somehow, standing on that deck again, among strangers who now felt like family, it felt like he had finally come home. As he turned to leave, Richard passed by Lieutenant Mason, the same officer who had stopped him earlier. The young man stood at attention, his jaw clenched, shame heavy on his face. "I'm sorry, sir," Mason said quietly. "I didn't see who you were." Richard paused, then gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "You will. From now on, you will see us all." It wasn't scolding. It was teaching, because sometimes the most powerful lessons in leadership don't come from rank. They come from remembrance. And as the ship's bell rang solemnly, echoing over the harbor like a call to reflection, every sailor there understood something deeper than orders or discipline. They understood that this wasn't just a ceremony. It was a sacred military tribute to a generation of men who had sacrificed everything and quietly asked for nothing in return. The sun had begun to set by the time Richard Hawley stepped off the USS Keller. Golden light danced across the deck, casting long shadows that felt almost like the spirits of those who had walked it before, men whose lives had ended too soon, whose names were etched in memory but forgotten by history books. But not today. Today, they were remembered, not with parades or speeches, but with presence, with the quiet respect of young sailors standing still, with a folded note from a new recruit who had slipped it into Richard's hand on the way down the gangway. "Because of men like you, I wear this uniform with pride." Richard's hands trembled slightly as he opened it, eyes wet. This wasn't just a visit. It had become something sacred. He looked over at Admiral Breckinridge, who stood by the railing, arms crossed, watching with solemn pride. They exchanged a glance that needed no words, a bond between warriors who had served in different times but carried the same weight. "You gave us more than we ever gave you," the Admiral said quietly. "This generation will remember, Richard." "I'll make sure of it." Richard simply nodded. He didn't need a monument. He had memory. He had passed something on that day, something far more valuable than medals or commendations. He had passed on truth. As he returned to the visitors' tent, the press had gathered. Word of the incident had spread, the rejected veteran brought back aboard by direct order of a decorated admiral. Reporters with notepads, cameras, and microphones lined the walkway, hoping to get a quote, but Richard didn't give them one. Instead, he stopped by the dock's edge, took a deep breath of ocean air, and gazed out at the ship, the steel body that had once protected him, that had once nearly taken him, and that now had finally honored him. His granddaughter Emily reached for his hand. "You okay, Grandpa?" "I am now," he said with a soft smile. "Took me 60 years. But I finally got to say goodbye." Later that night, back at the Naval Base guest housing, Richard sat on his bunk, a familiar posture from a lifetime ago. He pulled out an old photo from his wallet. 4 young sailors, smiling, lean, alive. One of them was Mike Granger. He whispered. They remembered Mike. That night, Admiral Breckenridge held a private debrief with his officers. His tone was firm, but not angry. "What happened today must never happen again," he said. "Every time a veteran walks up our gangway, we salute. Every time a story, like Richard Hale's, reaches our ears, we listen. These are not relics. These are the very soul of our service." Lieutenant Mason was there, humbled, changed. After the meeting, he found Richard once more and asked the question that had been burning inside him since that morning. "Sir, why did you come back after all these years?" Richard looked at him with tired but kind eyes. "To keep a promise. To Mike. To all of them. I said I'd never let the Navy forget." Mason nodded. "You didn't, sir. And I won't either. Sometimes it takes just one man, one moment, to reignite a spark of honor that burns through generations. Richard Hawley may have walked off that ship alone, but he left behind a legacy stitched into the heart of every sailor who watched him that day. A reminder that true military tribute isn't about ceremonies or salutes. It's about remembrance. It's about respect. It's about the kind of heroic acts that don't make the news, but make our world better." And as the lights on the harbor flickered on, illuminating the quiet waters, a single Navy ship stood gently swaying in the tide. Aboard it echoed stories of battlefield courage, soldier sacrifice, and the unwavering dignity of real war heroes like Richard Hawley.